Hello, tonight I want to introduce David Berez. He has been a longtime friend of the Power of Our Story, and he has just been doing so much in really educating himself to be able to educate others in the power of storytelling. So it's such a pleasure to introduce him tonight. So a little bit about David. David Berez is a retired police officer and drug recognition expert, served more than 20 years with the East Windsor Police Department and a total of 33 years in emergency services, including EMS and OEM. Following his retirement, Berez is now the president and founder of Six4 Consultants, a public safety consulting firm. He is the author of A Resilient Life, A Cop's Journey in Pursuit of Purpose, a featured columnist, guest speaker, and panelist on a variety of public safety discussions. In September of 2020, Berez trained as a resiliency program officer and master resiliency trainer. He is a facilitator for Resilient Minds on the Front Lines, The Power of Our Story, and is working to grow resiliency for law enforcement retiree in New Jersey with the state's resilience program. In 2022, Berez was named to the Law Enforcement Advisory Council for Citizens Behind the Badge. He earned his Master of Applied Positive Psychology, MAPP, from the University of Pennsylvania, the foundational program in positive psychology. Berez is the first and only police officer to be accepted into this program and hold this degree. He completed his education with a capstone project focusing on emotional regulation in law enforcement officers through the use of the humanities. He believes that storytelling through literature and visual art can increase the well-being of the individual, communities, and institutions. Berez is now a positive psychology practitioner who teaches the use of positive interventions to support individuals, communities, and institutions to go beyond surviving and start thriving. And his tagline it reads, lead by example, stay resilient, earn your badge every day. And with that, I want to warmly welcome David Berez.
Thank you. I actually had this conversation with somebody earlier today. One of the hardest things to do is to hear your own bio read back to you. It is such a psychological phenomenon that makes you really take pause. It's embarrassing at one point, but also you take pause and realize, wow, there's a lot there. So it's kind of cool. Thank you for reading that. I appreciate that. How are we doing? Everybody doing good? Awesome. So today we are going to talk a little bit about storytelling as we get back to the original foundations of the power of our story. And as Sarah read in my bio, my thesis or capstone project for my graduate work was developing the humanities in positive psychology and creating opportunities for police. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There is some functionality to my presentation, so I apologize if there's music and stuff in the background. I don't necessarily know how to stop it. Maybe there we go. So I've renamed the Hip Cops program, which wasn't going over very well, back to tactical storytelling. And you put tactical in front of anything and cops will start listening to it. So it's rebranded tactical storytelling. Is a comprehensive exploration on how visual art, literature, and music can enhance the well-being and resilience in law enforcement through positive psychology intervention. So we're going to break down a lot of those words so we have a greater understanding of what we're talking about. I would also say up front that if you have questions or you're not understanding something, as we work through the first part of this, which is like the background and the sciencey stuff, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I can often get stuck in the weeds and not move on fast enough, but please tell me to do so if A, you're confused and want more, or B, you've had enough and want me to keep moving. So we're going to do this as a interactive experience. So where do we start? Storytelling is an interesting thing. Storytelling, it can be defined in a variety of different ways. But for me, storytelling has to do with the plight of a police officer. And there is two things that stick out to me in history that speak to that. And we have both of those things here. The first one that is pretty common in our shared worlds, whether you're military or any other type of first responder. In the New Testament, where God speaks to Isaiah and asks, "Who shall he send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah responds to him, "Here I am, send me." That in and of itself is the start of a story. Now, that biblical phrase is probably a third of the way through a greater story, but this starts Isaiah's story and how he becomes a warrior. And I think that's kind of a space that we all find ourselves in. So I want to just share that to set the stage. And then if we go back a little bit further to Rabbi Hillel in 10 BC, he comes up with this poem: "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" And that speaks really loud to me as the plight of the police officer and what we do here in the mental health space. Because we have to consider all the work we do to try to help others. We should be helping ourselves first and along the way. And if we don't do it now for ourselves or others, when do we start? And I think we can all be in a space where we've done the work for ourselves and we're doing the work for others. So I think that's relatable. So just a quick background beyond what Sarah said in my bio, and we'll talk more about this center picture transitions in a few minutes. I was a retired police officer from East Windsor. I was a volunteer for the rescue squad starting at the age of 14, which, by the way, when you start taking on these things as a first responder at 14, it does hit a little bit differently. And I did that for 10 years before I went to the police academy. And when I retired, I went over to emergency management in the town that I work in. So I'm a participant of the Police Unity Tour and an ambassador for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Program. And that all started with my buddy Shaft there, who you see in the bottom left corner, who was killed in 2011, May 21st, 2011, with the Maryland State Police. My first real loss in law enforcement, by the way. And then the book writing and my education. This transitions picture, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. This is a 3-part pictorial of the overarching space of my story. And that was digitally recreated, and I'll explain it more in a minute. Again, being a police officer was what I did. It's not who I am. And now as a consultant and a facilitator, it's what I do. It's not who I am. Who I am, it consists of what you see here, which is, sorry, wrong screen, is my family, my wife and my kids, and then a lot of the other stuff that you'll see here in the word cloud. That's who I am. So a little bit of my journey that's outside of my bio. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They came here in 1938. My grandmother came here in 1938. My grandfather a couple years before. And, Kristallnacht, for those of you that are familiar with your German Jewish history, was the night of broken glass, essentially, where the Nazis destroyed all Jewish homes and businesses. My grandmother left about a week after that. This picture that you see here in the upper left-hand corner is where my journey begins. This is where my grandfather's parents were killed in Dachau. This is the last letter they sent out of Dachau, which is hung up here in my office to my right. So that's where my story begins, and that has to do with transgenerational trauma. We're not going to get too much into that, but that's part of our story, the things that happened before we even were born. So I think it's important that we understand those foundations of our family history, because that's going to impact how you were raised, and how you were raised impacts how you move forward. This little boy here was me at about 3 years old, chronically sick all of the time. This was actually in Maine on a summer vacation. And this little boy was also sexually abused by a family friend for many years. And that face that you see there was one of cute kid, but a lot going on in that head of his, a lot of despair. And over here is my bar mitzvah picture. And you'll notice that there's somebody missing here. Should have been my dad. My dad left a few weeks before that and never came back. So shame on him. Now, down here with my transitions picture, this is me, obviously, 20 years in law enforcement. This is me today. This was actually the first day of my graduate program. I took this picture in front of our classroom. This is me in the messy middle. This picture is a Cezanne painting that's hanging at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. Obviously, not with my face and my uniform on it. This was painted in the early 1800s. So I'm old, but not that old. What I did with this picture as part of a school project was when I saw it hanging there in the Barnes Foundation, which was part of the humanities course that we took at positive psychology, I saw me in this picture. And I used then this picture for a school project. And what I did was on the curtain, I digitally put a tattered blue line flag. I put my face on the face that was there, a patch for my uniform, and I put a gun in my hand and my book on the table. So clearly this is not the original picture. This is a digital cut and paste. And then I superimposed these other items in there to represent me looking at that picture because I saw myself in this scene. Storytelling doesn't have to be the words we write. It doesn't have to be the picture we draw. It doesn't have to be the song we sing or listen to. We can see ourselves in the journey of others. And for me, I saw myself in the journey of this art form and put myself in that space. Oops. So the bags we carry, you're seeing a depiction of myself over here, and these are the bags that I'm carrying. Every one of these pictures is in one of these bags. And whether it brings about guilt, anger, abuse, depression, my childhood experiences, I'm sure we're all familiar with the ACEs scale. For full disclosure, I'm a 7. Not that it's a competition, but I'm sure if you haven't done it, you should understand what your adverse childhood experiences look like. It'll tell you a lot about who you are today. So what we do with these bags is we carry a lot of crap around with us, and we don't have the ability to put them down per se. But over time, especially if we have children, we'll be passing these bags along to others, and most likely our children. We can't get rid of the things that happened. They exist. They're in those bags and they're really freaking heavy. But if we deal with those things, we can take some of them out and put them aside, and we don't have to carry them around with us. And it lightens the load for the next generation or your partner or whoever you might be passing these bags down to. We're going to pass the bags, but you don't have to have as much in them. So what we're going to do in the storytelling process is taking some of that stuff out of those bags and setting them aside so we don't have to pass down the heavy bags. But what we are going to pass down is the best version of ourselves. So that's, we'll start just by thinking about that. And I said early on that a lot of the stats and stuff I have are law enforcement centric because that's generally my audience. I know I may be the only law enforcement. Who do we have here? Daniel is probably the only other law enforcement, and Barry. Oh no, Barry's military. So yeah, some of these stats probably won't apply to you, but take them for what they are, and you can generalize them to your own setting, your own profession. They are relatable, just not exact. So here we have 184 police suicides on average per year. What I want to emphasize about that number is that is the final piece of self-destructive behavior. So suicide is the end. There is nothing after that. But all of the other self-destructive behaviors that come first will end up leading this direction if you don't deal with them. Whether it's adultery, whether it's sex addiction, whether it's alcohol or drug abuse, anything that is adverse behavior is a precursor to what suicide at the end would look like. Police officers are 4 times more likely to die by their own hand than a felonious attack. The actual number is 3.8. The average person experiences 4 to 6. This is staggering to me. The average person experiences 4 to 6 traumas in their lifetime. That's not staggering. What's next is the average police officer encounters about 20 traumas per year, or 400 to 600 in their career. That study is over the course of a 25-year career. As a side note and footnote, here in New Jersey, we've just extended the retirement about 2 or 3 years ago. to, instead of 25 years, to 30 years. So you're adding another another 20% of these lifetime trauma accumulation. So what does a career look like after 30 years versus 25 in this space? And not everybody can become, a top ranking officer and be off the streets. There's going to be a number of people that are doing 30 years as patrolmen, and all the crap that they're seeing, or 30 years in homicide, or 30 years in sex assault. What are they, the added exposure that they're going to have is tremendous. So the average citizen over the age of 50 will live another 35 years. That should not be a shocking number to anybody. 85 years old is the average lifespan in this country. The average police officer over the age of 50 will live 7.8 years. That is an incredible decrease in life expectancy. I am 50. I'll be 51 in May, and I've been out a couple years. So, and I only did 20 instead of 25. So I figure I'm at like the 7.2 range to go. But so we'll see. I don't know. Hopefully I got a few more in me than that. But yeah, I want to make sure I make good use of my pension. I don't want to give the state back anything. So police officers have a higher rate of alcohol use and abuse. I don't think that should be a shocking statement for anybody to hear. More than 7% of police officers suffer from substance use disorder. That's a lot. That's, 1 out of every 11 or 12 cops have a substance use disorder. And 1 out of 6 police officers require alcohol interventions. And then 1 out of 20 of those of this number goes untreated. So we have a problem. Substance abuse is not correlated to, or I shouldn't say, being a police officer is not correlated to substance abuse. It's actually the other way around. It's the things that we're dealing with and seeing with the way our brain changes over time, over the course of our career, that causes us to look for these vices to numb the senses a bit. Excuse me. I don't think I have it in this presentation, but I think something that's important to talk about is the idea of neuroplasticity. That's the way the brain changes based on its exposure. And we talk about neuroplasticity all too often in a good way, but talking about habit formation change. So how do we fix from where we are and do better, which is great. We don't ever really talk about how we got so screwed up in the first place. And the science is quite frankly the same. So 20 years or 30 years, however long you've been in your business, that exposure changes your brain, not for the better, and creates this new normal that you think you're doing okay, but your body, as the book says, does keep the score of the traumas. But your brain isn't processing that you have a problem, because this, to your emotions, this is normal. So the whole idea of neuroplasticity, I think, needs to be explored in more greater detail from the beginning half and not just the fixing half. So going back to the here I am, send me idea, my personal mission as a result of this guy right here, Danny Pagnotta, good friend of mine, who couldn't find a path forward after July of 2020, and then took his own life on July 29th of 2020. The research in this presentation and all that I do is dedicated to my brother and sister law enforcement officers, specifically, who lead by example and earn their badge every day. The tagline that Sarah so gracefully said it in my intro. To those wounded and lost in the line of duty, my goal is that you are never forgotten. And this specifically is for Danny. In the wake of his loss, I promised that I would never allow that loneliness, that seemingly single lane choice, to be available to anybody else ever again. And it's in my heart to do whatever I can do to make sure that officers, veterans, any other first responders have the appropriate tools. We've done a really good job over the last number of years talking about awareness. I don't think we've done a great job about providing tools. Not to sound cynical, is what it is. If you guys know my personality, I say off-color stuff sometimes. I'm not a big fan of the podium lizards that go out and stand and just vomit their thing in front of a crowd of people for $10, $20, $30,000 at a clip, and then don't provide anybody the tools to walk away with. I was personally at a conference where one person decided that they couldn't anymore, went outside to their car and blew their brains out because everything coming out at this conference was negative Nancy stories about trauma repeated over and over and over again at a podium. And there was no way to gain any sort of optimism out of those presentations, because people were just saying how horrible their life is, how fucked up they are, and they weren't providing any tools on how to do better. So people in the audience are like, wow, that's my life, and walking away feeling worse than when they walked in. My goal is to show you what's real. We have a problem. Let's talk about it. But at the same time, let's address it in a way that's constructive for all of us, and let's provide the tools necessary. So I always say that Danny did not want to die. And I know that for a fact because he told me that. He just didn't know how to live, and he didn't see any other options to go forward. So this is always dedicated to him. We talked about a bunch of these numbers before. There's 234 police suicides recorded in 2019. That is the highest number for a year in the recorded history of it. A lot of those numbers come from Blue Help, Sharon Solomon, she's an amazing human that keeps track of all of this stuff. All volunteer, by the way. They don't make a nickel on their program, and they don't charge for any of their presentations. Sharon's amazing. 4 times higher risk. We talked about that, 7.8 years. 60% threshold. This is an important number here. So when we're talking about therapy, whether it's biopharma therapy, whether it's talk therapy, clinical, anything like that, Marty Seligman, who is a psychologist out of University of Pennsylvania, has been studying this stuff for decades upon decades upon decades. And he's currently 83 or 84 years old this year. I think he'll be 84 in February. In his book, Flourish, he talks about the 60% threshold. Any type of therapeutic intervention has a 60% threshold towards solving the problem. So where do we go to get that other 40%? We have to, because we can't just stop when we get back to zero. Hold on. We can't just stop when we get back to zero. We have to go from 0 back to positive 10. Otherwise, we're not doing ourselves right. We have to go into that flourishing space. So we get to that 40% by the coaching, which is positive psychology and the science of well-being. But what comes down to is doing the hard work. This, people can tell you what to do and how to do it on the therapy side, great. But when you get to the coaching side, they ask you the tough questions, and it's up to you to follow through and do better for yourself. You need to do the work. So we talked about this as well, the trauma exposure for police officers. This is the one that gets to me. And we can get these numbers to change, but we have to put in the work up front. I think changing culture in the police academy level is probably a good place to start. So the suicide and self-destructive behavior crisis in law enforcement. Here's the risk factors. We know most of these. We've been talking about these for a long time, and they should not be too surprising to anyone. If you do have any questions about them, please ask. But I think we've all been, I don't like the V word, but we've all been victim to these things. These are some of the precursor symptoms that we should be considering in our colleagues and our friends and our family members. Tumultuous domestic relationships. The last thing to fall apart before anybody goes into that permanent self-destructive mode, usually leading to suicide, is the relationship. That is usually the last thing to go. So if you have been working with somebody, or you've been watching somebody take on some of these other issues, and all of a sudden their domestic partner, spousal, husband, wife, child relationships start to fall apart, be nervous, because that's the last one to go before they go. So if you see that, make sure that you're addressing that with your loved ones. Research does show us that administrative stress and lack of organizational support are the leading contributors to both increased hopelessness and PTSD symptoms, even more than the job stress alone. So the job stress is terrible, but we can work through it. It's the betrayal that gets us every time. It's the betrayal. It's the organizational structure that doesn't support the struggling individual that sends us over the edge. Substance abuse in law enforcement, again, shouldn't be shocking numbers to anybody. We talked about these in the previous slide. Impact on relationships. Again, this is the last thing to go, but it's important to understand the professional stressors by law enforcement officers do extend beyond the workplace. Now, we're going to talk about briefly some strategies to put in place for that beyond the storytelling piece, which is practicing the pause. And we can discuss that briefly here because I'm not sure where it pops up later. I don't remember. But if on your way home from work, listen to some music, the same music every time, it tells your brain, it trains your brain that I am now leaving work and I'm now going home and I need to recalibrate who I am. I'm not a cop anymore. Now I'm dad, husband, whatever, wife, whatever. And having those consistent rituals is really important. Have something in your car that smells or reminds you of home. Sniff it when, I know it sounds like a weird Joe Biden thing, but the sniff it on your way home so it reminds you of where you're going and how your brain needs to transform. The music is a big one. We're going to talk more about music on day 3 of this, but music is a big one, but it has to be consistent. Allow your brain to recognize that signal of you're now going home. And you can do the same thing in reverse. When you're on your way to work, crank up some Metallica. I'm a big fan. Listen to some Metallica on the way to work. It'll get your juices flowing and you're going to be ready to go. If anybody's into Disturbed or Five Finger Death Punch, those are some of my favorites in that genre. Get that going in a car on the way to work because you're going to leave all your crap at home and your brain is going to know that, all right, this is work mode time, flipping on that switch because that you're listening to that music consistently over and over again. But I think we digressed here. Mood influences. As soon as I start talking about Metallica, I'm out. So mood influences, when you bring your stuff home and if you are checked out at home, your family's going to notice that and they're going to respond to that. So if your mood sucks when you're at home, you're only going to get more annoyed by the mood that sucks of the people you're going home to because you brought the suck home. So it's a downward spiral, but you can catch yourself in that spiral and fix it and go back up again. That's Barbara Fredrickson model of the broaden and build. We'll talk a little bit about that later on as well, I believe. Work-related arguments, leave them at work. Water cooler stuff, the bullshit, leave it at work. Nobody at home cares, nor should they. You can say you had a bad day. You can explain it a little bit, but leave the emotion at work. Compartmentalizing is important for us. The stigma barrier. This is a sticky conversation because there's a lot of people that don't agree with me, but they also haven't necessarily read the data that I cling to. And I wish they would. Stigma is an issue. I'm not going to deny that. Stigma is a problem. It's not the problem that we think it is, though. It's the biggest problem that we have in this space is access. And the research proves that out. Stigma is really low on the why people don't get help scale. Stigma exists. There's a public stigma, self-stigma, cultural barriers. We can read all about those here as we follow along. But the idea that this is the reason people aren't getting help is factually incorrect. It is an issue, not denying that. You can argue with me all day long. It is not the leading cause. Again, it's access. And when I say access, we're talking about knowledge of the resources. And if you have knowledge of the resources, how do you get to them? What's the process? So I can know that certain therapists exist, but if I don't know how to get to them, it's irrelevant if they exist or not. And one of the things that breaks down that barrier of access is understanding the people in your circles, whether it be at work or in your personal life, that have gone through those resources themselves. And that's why the storytelling part is so important. And that's through a peer support model at work, or like we have here in New Jersey, the Resiliency program, what they call Resiliency Program Officers, RPOs. And again, we'll talk more about that in a minute as well. Or at home, just telling your kids, yeah, I struggle with X, Y, and Z. So I go talk to this person about that, and they help me work through these things. You want your kids to know that because when they are struggling, they're going to come and ask you, hey, mom, hey, dad, This isn't going well. Can I go talk to somebody about this? Or maybe can I just talk to you about this? It opens up the ability to have conversation. And that all comes through the process of storytelling. And whether you're sharing it casually as part of your daily speech and the things you say, or whether you are intentional about telling those stories, not for the story itself, but as a platform to talk about other issues. It doesn't have to be, your storytelling doesn't have to be about you. And that's where I struggle with the podium lizards. And sorry if that offends anybody, but that often find that those folks make the journey and the story about them to make themselves feel better rather than trying to pull that forward to make it better for others. So I think there's two ways to tell stories. You can do it selfishly, or you can do it selflessly for the purposes of helping others. So that's that. So current remediation efforts. There are a lot of those, as many of us may know, and none are necessarily better or worse. Statistically, that is not a true statement, but for the most part, they all are effective in some way. And so that's why I say there's none that are better or worse. They all have their ability to positively affect people. There is no method other than the selfish method that we've already spoken about that is destructive to other people. So looking at these, and it's an interesting conversation when you look at some of these numbers. Currently provided is mental wellness resources. And there's, by the way, there's a huge difference between wellness and well-being. And those of you that have followed along in my articles or have heard me speak before, you know how much I literally despise the word wellness. And because wellness is a verb, it's an action item that is a check the box, that is a here and now. It's a hedonic response to a greater issue. And what happens when you stop the wellness activity? Literally nothing. You are back to where you started from. Now, if we look at the idea of well-being, well-being is a holistic concept where you're solving not the problem, but you're just doing better from a strengths-based perspective. So I talk about that from the perspective of growing grass. And if you want to grow nice grass and have a good lawn, I know you guys in Southern California may not have the same issues we have here in the hellhole armpit of New Jersey. But if you want to grow nice grass and impress your neighbors, you can't only pull the weeds, because you're left with holes where more weeds are just going to naturally grow. So if you want to grow nice grass, you have to fertilize it and strengthen the grass that you have, and therefore push out the weeds, and they will naturally dissipate, die, and go away. Same thing goes with our mental health. If we fertilize and grow the good that we have going on for ourselves, grow from our strengths-based perspective, the negative stuff will tend to become a smaller part of our lives and eventually drift off. But if we just engage in a wellness program, someone tells me to work out, it'll make me feel better, that lasts for a couple of days and then goes away, and you're going to get fat again. So that's what wellness, in my mind, and my definitions, does for you. Now, there's nothing wrong with working out for those couple of days and looking at your wellness activities, but the goal should be well-being. And because that is a more longer term, as Aristotle called it, a eudaimonic effect, which eudaimonic mean living the good life or a purposeful or meaningful life. That needs to be the goal, because then wellness naturally happens. If we are in a place of elevated well-being, we'll do the wellness activities. So every department's got their wellness resources out there. It's a thing, it's a word, it's a buzzword, as resilience is. We'll talk about more about resilience too. Employee assistance programs are required in some states by law. And I have found that they are pretty useless as far as the interactions that I've had. I actually really appreciate the people here in New Jersey that do the EAP programs. But they're very ineffective. Whatever. And you can see just by the effectiveness rating there, it's just over half of effective ratings. The material is about half of the effective ratings. Chaplain support, not as prominent across the country, but a much higher effectiveness rating. Chaplain support is very important. It's a growing field for sure. And down at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, we are also putting together a large chaplain program for them. that has been really effective. Resilient Minds has a chaplains program that has been really effective. And so it is a growing part of the field, and it's doing well. People are really latching onto that. Peer counseling, peer-to-peer support. Peer counseling is probably not a great phrase, but peer-to-peer support is not offered in as many places, but also is growing in its effectiveness, because that's where your resources come from. That's where the access piece starts to come into the conversation again. The biggest piece is the resiliency training. Not a lot of people doing it, but it has the highest effective rate. So that's why we're here today to talk about the storytelling aspect of building resilience and anti-fragility, and we'll define those two in a minute. But the more resiliency style training that we can get out there, the greater effective rate it's going to have, because there's a ripple to that. So healthy people breed healthy people, unhealthy people breed unhealthy people. And for that, I talk about the water cooler. If you go to the water cooler at 3:45 in the morning, when everybody has been staring at their computer, typing reports that literally don't matter, but they're mind numbing, and the computer's just staring back at you and your fingers aren't moving. So you go up to get a glass of water from the water cooler. Two other people follow you over there. What's the first conversation everybody has there? Excuse the language. Fuck this guy. Fuck that guy. The chief's such an asshole. That is 90% of the water cooler conversation. Completely ineffective and brings everybody's well-being down. Imagine the change we could have. And by the way, that's a ripple effect, right? It takes one person to start that and everybody piles on the rabbit. Imagine if the first person, instead of saying F this guy, says, dude, Jim, you should have seen it. Yesterday was the highlight of being a parent. I went to my kid's baseball game, freaking home run. It was like 420 feet over the wall. It was the most unbelievable moment to watch my kid completely thrive and succeed as a baseball player. We try to one up each other. So don't you think Jim's going to come back and say, yeah, man, my daughter, when she was riding her horses, you should have seen this jump that she did. And it elevates. We grow that. So you're growing those good conversations instead of going into the gutter. But it's so much easier. That takes work, though. It takes thought. It's just so much easier to go into the gutter, but we have to work past that. Build the good. Awesome. Questions about any of that? Because I think this is our first opportunity for a pause on the science stuff. I'm just looking at the time to see how long that took us to go through that. Not bad, about 40 minutes or so, 38 minutes. Anybody want to ask any questions about the science stuff before we start talking about the programs and the interventions themselves? Thoughts, comments, concerns? Barry.
Yeah, David, I thought those stats were really interesting in that it shows, one, the power of chaplaincy. And the question I've always asked is, why is it so effective? And I think it comes down to two things, which is the power of compassionate presence and connection. And the other one is when we add the possibility of faith in an acceptable form that works for the other. I think also the peer stuff talks about the value of tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you put people back in tribe, when you have compassionate people with a faith component sitting opposite people, and then when you do your resilience training, it's an incredibly effective triad from the figures that you were presenting.
Couldn't agree more with all of that. I love the fact that you use the word compassion versus empathy, and I think that's really important. I think it's important to highlight. When we're empathic towards other people, there's this connotation to the definition that we can feel their pain. And the reality is that even if you've gone through the same exact thing, everybody feels it differently. So to be empathic towards other people's issues is a struggle for me to latch onto. I appreciate that you used it in the frame of compassion. And often those two words are interchangeable, but in the reality, they're not. So I think compassion is definitely something we should consider when having these conversations versus being empathic. So thank you for phrasing it that way. It's a great concept. Todd.
Yeah, so one of the things, you talked about in the beginning was, your presentation is kind of focused on the law enforcement aspect of it. But this is anecdotal, but I think it speaks to the kind of the universality of this. On the opening day of the first responders bridge retreats, one of our guys, Ryan Arthur, he's a peer support team member with the Columbus Division of Fire. He goes through a little bit of an exercise with the attendees, and it's always a pretty good mix of law enforcement, fire, and he kind of goes through the signs, the behaviors, the thoughts of law enforcement and fire, and also corrections and dispatch that struggle with post-traumatic stress and those things that they exhibit. And he asks anybody who identifies in themselves those behaviors to stand. Pretty much every attendee stands. And then he talks about suicide. And he asks the question, have any of you ever thought about taking your own life? Has a crew member, a partner, a coworker, or a friend taken their own life? He asks anyone whose life has been impacted by suicide to sit down. And the last three retreats in a row, there has been one person standing after that. So that's the universality of what we're talking about here. And also, I'd like to hear what you think about the trust factor. I think you're right about the stigma part of this. A lot of people talk about that, and I think that does come into play, because I think from our own aspect of how we think about ourselves as first responders and veterans, and the public perception of ourselves about how rescuers don't need rescuing, and that does play a part. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on the trust aspect of why we're not taking advantage of resources that are out there. And I've heard this from a lot of first responders that I've worked with, especially through the first responder bridge. Yeah, we've got all these resources. We have this peer support team, and we have these, but you know what? I still don't trust the fact that that's all going to be confidential. I still don't trust that I'm going to reach out to a peer support team member and that's not going to get back somehow to my agency's leadership.
So I think there's two things to that. And I think that there is an important need to understand the cultural competency of who you're speaking with, and especially when it comes down to getting professional help. There are some great therapists out there that aren't worth a shit when it comes down to first responders, and because they just don't get it. They can have studied it in a book, they can have had great internships, but unless you've kind of walked the walk, it's really a challenge. Now, you don't have to have been a police officer to be able to be a psychologist, psychiatrist for a police officer. I know mine has not been, but he is one of the greatest humans on the planet, and he gets it. And he's also the chief psychologist for the New Jersey State Chiefs of Police Association, and just got made the chief psychologist for Massachusetts State Chiefs of Police Association as well. So he gets it. That said, crap, where was I going with that? There's definitely trust issues, but it's something profound. I'm sure it was the best thing I was ever going to say. Now I just lost track of it. But there's trust issues. No, there's no doubt. Now, as far as your stuff going back to your department, I think it's important to understand that if you make a claim that you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, everybody has an obligation to report that. So I think that's an important thing to understand. So that's not a trust issue, that's an obligation issue. And everybody here that's taken an oath understands that. And if you are having those thoughts, I urge you to say them, maybe not to somebody in your agency, but to somebody that you do trust that can get you the support and help that you need. Um, I also think that it's important, if you are in that state, that you do separate from work for a period of time to hit the reset button. I don't think you can reset while doing the job. I really don't. Um, I think there's a need to step away for that period of time till you get your shit right, and then come back stronger than you were before you left. And my psychologist and my friend, Dr. Lou Schlosser, uh, has done every fit for duty test in the state of New Jersey probably in the last 20 years. And his stats show that 98% of police officers go back to work after having seen him. And the 2% that haven't were by choice. So it's that trust factor is real, but I'll also say you have to trust the system because it's set up for your success and not for your detriment. Sarah.
First off, David, I really like your presentation. I think it is so cool to have the pictures there as you're sharing the story. And you had mentioned that too, just, using art or pictures or music along with your story. So I just want to thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think with all this time that I've known you, I think seeing the pictures and the illustrations also was just very powerful in your storytelling. I think the thing that hit me too, and I've heard this before, but somehow it hit me even more tonight, is the difference between civilians. I think that would be the group that it was talking about. Retire at 50, they usually have 35 years to go. For a police officer retiring at 50, they have what, 7.5 years, I think I saw.
But that's just lifespan beyond the age of 50. It has nothing to do with your work.
Lifespan, but okay.
So civilians' lifespan beyond the age of 50, they have 35 years.
Right.
Police officers, beyond whether they retire or not, beyond the age of 50, have about 7.8 years.
Okay, thank you. That's incredible. I've never heard stats like that. I don't think it's like that with veterans. I don't know about firefighters, but just how this is so specific to law enforcement. There's so many crossovers like we talked before, but this seems to be different.
So I think the veteran space, and Barry, I'd be interested to hear eventually your commentary on this, but I think the veteran space, unless you have a career infantryman, they're not getting the prolonged 20 to 25 year exposure to the things that officers are getting exposed to. They have combat tours that they see things probably 25 years worth in a week, but it's not prolonged exposure. And I think that prolonged exposure makes a big difference. Firefighters, and I say this out of love, also don't have that because their shifts are 1 or 2 a week at best. And unless you're in a really busy house in a really busy city, you're not, again, having that amount of exposure over a prolonged period of time. And I just think that that's where the difference comes in. Cops are working 40 to 60 hours a week, 12-hour shifts, no sleep. And again, not a dig, but in a firehouse, you're sleeping while on duty during your regular sleeping hours, as long as you're not getting woken up for calls, but you have more of an opportunity and it's accepted to take that rest. In law enforcement, you're expected to keep going 100 miles an hour for the entire shift. And if you happen to doze off behind a building somewhere and you get caught, you're screwed. You're getting jammed up. So, and it's just not safe, to be quite honest with you. People weren't trying to pick off firemen. People were trying to pick off cops. So it's, now listen, nothing's foolproof and there are documented incidences of, firehouses getting lit up, but it's not the norm. So it's troubling, and you can't fix it. You can just do better for yourself to try to build out those numbers.
That's the thing to highlight, is like just the fact that you are releasing your stories, like Dr. Pennebaker talks about, the power and the overall healing that happens when we release those hard stories, release what is happening, can definitely prolong life because of overall wellness, the healing factor. I did talk to a debriefer, a therapist who is, the head debriefer for a police department, and she's always saying that, like, gosh, if these police officers would just come in at the beginning
Yeah, I agree.
and share, then they will learn how to deal with their trauma. And then it won't turn into the cancers or the heart disease or that takes their life after 7.5 years, after 50 years old. So I just think you brought up some really important points.
I appreciate that. From the medical science versus social science, the that stress causes inflammation, and that inflammation causes disease, and that disease is what ends up getting you to your 7.8 year number. If we can reduce that stress, reduce the inflammation, reduce the disease as a result, heart attacks go down, strokes go down, cancer rate goes down, and I think then we extend those numbers. We can't change the constant, which is the job. We can change the variables, which is how we respond to it.
Excellent. Thanks for highlighting that.
Of course. And Courtney, and then we'll move on.
I there's a couple of thoughts that I had and then a couple of questions. So, I lost my husband in 2019 to military suicide or veteran suicide, and I have engulfed myself into that world. I think it's very important to differentiate because these data points that you're sharing are mind-blowing. They're just very eye-opening to me personally. Um, from a science side, I am a scientist and I have done a tremendous amount of research on odor association or what your brain does when it picks up a smell. And there is a lot of data, like scientifically proven, that you associate smell over associating any other sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the more people could use that to their advantage, the
Mm-hmm.
better off they are because it influences your brain chemistry to react very differently.
Yes.
And I just wanted to note that because I've done a tremendous amount of research there, and it is something that you brazed over, but it's huge. And I was very happy to hear you say that because I think the more you could acclimate where you want to go, the more this is why Disney creates sense for people to buy for their house, right? Because it associates them going to Disney World and they're
Yep.
happy there. It's no different than that. So it's a very important thing. Um, so in the military community and the veteran community, there are a lot of there's a stigma, but that stigma is proven to show that they didn't get the support that they wanted or needed at the
Mm-hmm.
time, whether they were active duty or they were a veteran. And you were saying that there was a point where they have to trust, as a police officer, they have to trust the difference or they have to trust the process. Is that stigma the same in like the police officers where if they do speak up, do they have like the right support to support them at that time, or is that just what
So
does
that's a
that look
great question. And so I think the word stigma to me is challenging because I think the stigma is a fear of reality more than it is a stigma. So the reality is when you speak up for help and you go through your agency to do that, yeah, you're getting pulled off the road. Yeah, you're going to lose your badge and gun until you get your stuff right because they don't want to be responsible for you making bad choices at work because of the troubles that you're experiencing. So the stigma, I'll put it in air quotes, is, well, if I say anything, I'm going to get fired or lose my job. Well, you're not going to get fired or lose your job, but you are going to lose your privileges to be a police officer until you get right. And that is troubling for people. And I get it because we have an identity issue with people identifying as their uniform and their badge and their gun. That's who they are, not what they do. That's why I emphasize that about myself in the front end. And I think there's a military component to that, where folks that are all in may have that identity crisis as well. So if they speak up and they're afraid that they're going to lose their command or they're going to lose their position or their job, or they're going to have to go back to infantry instead of special forces, I don't know if that's stigma. I think that's a reality check. And I think it's a fear of what comes down the road. So there is a process there. It's not always great, but it's there for a reason, and I believe in it. So as far as the stigma goes, I think that's an emotional thing that people have to work to get past, is what people are thinking about me from the outside looking in, or the self stigma. Am I okay with my vulnerability of saying I need help? And I think that is more of a factor of the self stigma than it is from the outside looking in, either the agency or the community looking at you differently. Because I do believe that the strength is in the support and getting help. And the weakness is trying to deal with it yourself and making decisions that are, catastrophic, either to your family, to you, or your circumstances. And I don't pretend to know everybody else's challenges or why they make the decisions that they make. I don't know. When we talk about suicide, we can't interview the experts. They're gone. And I wish we could, because we would learn a lot more. But it's obviously not possible. When you look at certain interviews, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name at the moment. I've watched the video 100 times. It's the Black young male that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. He was like one of 3 survivors ever in the history of people trying to do that. And
Kevin Hines.
Thank you very much. That is exactly who I was thinking of. That video is fascinating. For those of you that haven't seen it, Google it, watch the video. You will get a peer into under the hood, or peek under the hood of somebody who's suicidal. But not really. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to kill himself. He wanted to get help. And he said if one person on his way walking to the bridge would have stopped and said, "Hey man, are you okay?" He would have said no, and he wouldn't have jumped. So I think the lesson there is, we all know somebody who's struggling in a way that's beyond normal. So I think we all have to do our due diligence and do those buddy checks. And even when people aren't struggling, there's this great paper out there called Good Night Bro, and it became a trend. And I wrote about it not that long ago. And then actually it was a while ago, and then it just got republished. But the idea is, just call people to wish them a good night. They're going to think you're nuts. They're going to ask you what's wrong, and they're going to think that you're dying of cancer or something like that. But the reality is, it puts a smile on everybody's face and makes people think that you're thinking of them, which is all we really want. And one of my mentors, Sonia Lubomirsky, who is a researcher out in California, I forget what school she's at, Stanford, I think, actually. She's coming out with a new book in February about love. She studies love and happiness. And in the book, she talks about the many years of research that her and her colleague did. And when we look at the idea of love, and I think this goes to kind of what we're talking about, people don't need to be loved. They need to feel loved. And that's what their research came to show. And I think it's very apropos to what we're talking about here. People don't need your sympathy or your empathy or your compassion. They need to feel it. So when you reach out in times when they don't necessarily need it the most, that's when it means the most. Because when you're reaching out when they need it the most, it can come across empty. So I think we're really going sidetracked here. I'm sorry, I digress from your original question, but so I hope that answers kind of where you were going with that. And if not, redirect me. Courtney, that was good, or did it answer your question?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yeah.
Okay.
All good.
Awesome. Cool. So great questions, great conversation. I'm glad we're having it. It's also time to move on. And we're going to finish out the science portion. And I think we're going to push off the first activity to next week, unless you guys want to hang around. I have the time, but I'll put that on you. So let's move on to some of the actionable side of this. And effective resiliency programs, like I showed in that graph, are definitely the number one effective tool in this process. It started at University of Pennsylvania back in 2008 with the comprehensive soldier fitness program put together by UPenn under Dr. Marty Seligman, Karen Rivich and Judy Salzberg. And they did the research through that program and came up with a Master Resiliency Trainer program for the Army. Incredibly effective. They trained, I think it was 1.2 million soldiers in a very short period of time. It's the largest psychological study in history. And there was a 78% reduction in suicide in the first 365 days after that program was installed. And the way that it was originally set up was that officers were trained to be MRTs, and then they would give the program to non-commissions, NCOs, and then junior NCOs or junior enlisteds. And it became a check the box thing because it was a yes sir, no sir throughout the whole program, and it did not go well. So what they ended up doing was they put it into the hands of the drill instructors, and the drill instructors were instituting this program through basic training and beyond. They had a whole unit of MRTs that was associated with the drill instructor program, and they were then pushing out to even currently active members of the military, and it was incredible. They were also able to predict through that program who was going to get promoted, who was going to attempt suicide, who was going to get awarded valor medals. And they were like 90% correct across the board on all of it based on that program. So that's the PEN program. That then spawned off into Valor, Officer Safety and Wellness program, which was put through PEN, which was the original law enforcement version of the Master Resiliency Trainer program. FBI National Academy Associates took it over. And then in New Jersey, we were the first state in the country to do it statewide. All 36,000 cops have been trained in this resiliency framework. I was part of that as a retiree and kind of volunteered with that process. I explained in the beginning, it's kind of how I got involved. The program fell apart over the last 4 years because of political fallout with the Attorney General, who, thank God, as of yesterday is gone because of our gubernatorial turnover. Governor's no good, but the new incoming Attorney General is awesome. She's the one that helped us start this program back in 2019. So she's amazing. Her name's Jen. And I have the privilege of now going back as a consultant for the program. So I'm at the AG's office part-time now, which is amazing and great experience. So Resilient Minds on the Front Lines is an example of one of the nonprofits that is also doing this work. The guys that run this program came from this program. So when they retired and moved on, they did it. They're now doing it privately. And Michael, who's the owner of Resilient Minds on the Front Lines, is also one of our authors for Wounds to Wisdom. So that is effective resilience programs. So what is resiliency? And this is an interesting conversation. And the next slide will break it down even more. The academic definition: positive psychology defines resilience and the ability to effectively cope with, adapt to, and recover from adversity, stress, or significant life challenges. It involves the capacity to bounce back from difficult experiences and often emerge stronger and more resourceful. The common definition is resiliency is not just the ability to bounce back, but rather the ability to bounce forward. But what that really is anti-fragility. Anti-fragility and resiliency are not the same thing. And so when we talk about resiliency, this is where we started, this is where we put in the work, and then we end up over here. So it works to get us back to zero. Resiliency doesn't actually make us better than we were before. That's a space of anti-fragility. And here's what I mean by that. So here's fragile. This is where we're broken. Resiliency has these qualities where we get back to that center point, to a baseline. But anti-fragility is the concept that allows us to grow from the challenges that we had. That's the post-traumatic growth piece. When we're fragile, this is damage from a disorder. Resiliency is unaffected by the disorder because we put in the work. We have that shield up, so we don't go back to this space. But anti-fragility allows us to benefit from the disorder. This is more of the positive, even though resiliency is under positive psychology. This is what positive psychology is about, recognizing that bad exists, but we can do better off of a strengths-based approach. Both can be true at the same time. And examples of anti-fragility are probably all familiar with the kintsugi bowl, the Japanese art form, where you break expensive pottery, you put it back together with these liquid gold that hardens, and it's stronger than it was before it broke in the first place. The wind is anti-fragile. The wind can be destructive, but it also can move our ships. It also can provide power for us. Fire, the same way, it can be destructive, but it also allows us to heat ourselves, our homes. It allows us to have light in places where there's darkness. Water, the same. Water, floodwaters, we saw it in North Carolina last year, destroyed everything, but it hydrates us, it keeps us alive. Eggs can be broken, but they also nourish us. And our minds are the same way. They can break us down, but they can also be the building block that gets us better. So that's the concept of anti-fragility. So positive psychology is the new dimension that I believe will get us out of this rut of awareness only and move us into the space of providing actionable tools. And I think that positive psychology as a science has a lot to offer. It's a strengths-based approach to doing better and building from a baseline. It is a very rigorous scientific field where there's a lot of actionable research that goes into measurement tools that then allows us to build from there. It is as sciencey as it gets in the social science space, and it allows us to have this thriving focus. It emphasizes factors contributing to human flourish and well-being, not just survival. That's the difference between resiliency, which is survival, and anti-fragility, which is the growth. Positive psychology is grounded in the PERMA theory, positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. I gratuitously put my pictures of me and Marty in here because it makes me feel better about myself and gives me positive emotion. But it's also a relationship, the R, that has led to my own well-being. On a side note, for those that are not familiar with who Marty is in the world, other historical psychologists and historians in the space of psychology look at Aristotle, Plato, Freud, Marty Seligman as the most influential folks in psychology at all. So having him not only as a teacher and a mentor is really special for me. I also have him as a friend. And it just warms my heart to even see the two of us standing there next to each other. This was at a reunion earlier this year in October. And this picture here is in his rose garden at his house, which is his place of solace. He grows roses. So pretty special guy. The PERMA model, to break it down a little bit more, positive emotions is the experience of joy and gratitude and hope. Those are things we often hear about in the wellness conversations. Gratitude is, by the way, my favorite because it's free. It doesn't cost anything to be grateful. It does cost you to open your heart up a little bit, but gratitude is multidimensional. It's not as simple as it appears, but it is the easiest and freest thing you can do to free your mind. So not only to be grateful for what you have, but to show gratitude towards others, because that's not just about you, it's giving a gift to somebody else. And the same thing when people show gratitude towards you, don't wash it off because now you're dismissing their level of gratitude. Be gracious about receiving gratitude from others because you're giving that gift back. Engagement, this is the flow state. I just like saying the guy's name. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is the guy that talks about flow. And it's the concept of being lost in time, where you're doing something that you're so engaged with it that time has passed and you didn't even realize it. Relationships were very important. We talked a lot about that today. Meaning is so important in the space of law enforcement, military, and other first responders. You have to find meaning outside of your uniform because if you don't, your purpose will be diminished and you're not going to flourish. And then accomplishment. This was always a very hard one for me. I never have, and I still don't always feel very accomplished, even when I've done great things. And I don't say that last sentence gratuitously. We've all done great things here. I struggle to embody that as something that I've accomplished. That's one of the things I work on regularly is my pride in my accomplishments. And one of the positive interventions that I use for that is having a positive portfolio where I put all the good things I've done into this portfolio as time moves forward, and I can reflect back on them and have pride in those things that are in that bag. So the one thing that's missing here, I already showed it to you, is health. So there's a new concept out there of PERMA-H, which is adding the H for health, because the reality is if we don't have our health, we don't have anything. There's that saying that goes, people wish for 1,000 things, but healthy people wish for 1,000 things. Unhealthy people wish for one. So to me, health is very important to add to this conversation. Red cape, green cape, we're not going to really go into it. It could be another hour just on that. It's about understanding that the red cape is fighting for evil, which is what cops and military first responders are often doing, versus enhancing the good, which is the green cape. I don't know why this keeps bouncing around. And but as law enforcement officers, first responders, we have to wear a reversible cape, not a light switch on and off, but more of a dimmer. And we have to be able to flow back and forth, wear them both at the same time. Because on the on the red cape side, the hypervigilance builds in and you can't turn it off. On the green cape side, if you turn off that hypervigilance, you're likely to get killed. So there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere, and that's the reversible cape. So positive psychology interventions, those are the tools. And that's where we're going to talk more about the storytelling piece. We have 4 more slides, and then we're going to break for quick questions. And then we can try the first intervention or we can move it off to next week. Positive psychology interventions, they are evidence-based. This isn't throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks. What we're talking about is stuff that's been researched, and it's evidence-based, research-informed activities. They're measurable. They've been measured to show correlation between the activity and well-being and positive affect. So they're all practical strategies, measurable outcomes. This is honestly the most important part, because if we can't measure the outcome, it's not worth doing, because we don't want to hurt ourselves with something that we don't know anything about. And then personalized approach. I mentioned the name Sonia Lubomirsky before. She's also done a lot of work in the area of something called person activity fit, meaning that there is an actual graph where an activity may not be for every person, but there's a way to adapt it for you using a process. You can go through that scientific process. You can say, well, if I'm exercising, I can only do 10 push-ups. I can't do 30. So that's fine. You do your thing, but you can adapt all the activities to work best for you. So let's introduce the positive humanities. It is an emerging field that bridges the arts and humanities with the science of human flourishing. This is new in the last couple of years. I'm one of the first people to kind of merge it into the space of law enforcement. It's had its ups and downs. Different people are reacting to it differently. It explores how engagement with the visual arts, literature, and music can create shared meaning and purpose with communities. You can also look at dance, you can look at film, you can look at ethics. Those are all in the humanities as well. I only took on those 3. So for law enforcement, these 3 aspects of the humanities are easily accessible, which is why I chose them. You can music through the radio or streaming, visual art on the internet or museums, and literature through the libraries, bookstores, or your own pen and paper. All of the humanities interventions are looked at through the RAISE model. This is the science side. We're not going to go through all of this. We're just going to consider immersion and expression as our 2 modalities here. And we're just going to work through them one at a time, literature, visual art, and music, and the immersion and the expression pieces. Again, we're not going to get to all of it today for sure. And storytelling towards resiliency and anti-fragility, reading, visual art, and music. And these are the baseline benefits: emotional processing and meaning making, social connection and belonging, growth, hope, and post-traumatic resilience or growth. So the interventions we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks are creating a meaning statement, a meaning story, a visual narrative, and music integration. Hopefully today we can get to the meaning statement if you guys want to stick around. All of this can be summed up in one slide, and that is here we have, this is where we normally are. If we go through, this is what they call left of bang. When we get to bang and we have the event, if we don't have any support system, we're just going down this horrible ladder, horrible spiral. But if we do the resiliency training and we build ourselves up to a higher baseline, when we go through that bang phase, we're more likely to end up with post-traumatic growth at the end because we're starting out at a higher level. This slide is created by the FBI National Academy, and this was their number one and their first slide and the last slide of every presentation. So this graph says it all. We're going to talk about literature today, as long as we have time. Please cut me off if you don't want to go through this today and we want to move on to next week. But the literature as transportation is very important in the storytelling process. We can have narrative transportation, which is taking us through the journey of somebody else and finding ourselves or getting lost in it to understand more about ourselves and our own journeys. The restorative narratives are stories that tell us about healing. And what's very interesting about the restorative narratives, and I think I mentioned it before, is when we are engaged in those, we are more likely to help others in the process. So when we listen to other people or read other people's journeys that have not a good ending, but a productive ending. Good is relative. Productive is measurable. We are more likely to help others because we see a path and a way to do that. But we have to find ourselves in a healing space first so we don't hurt other people in the process. Writing our own story is probably the most effective way that we can tell a story. Talking about it's great. Writing it is very differently because it still lives somewhere else tangibly, but not in our heads. So we can refer back to it anytime. And that was the goal of Wounds to Wisdom. We had all of our 29 authors write their incredible story in 1,500 words or less, and we published them together for one book, thanks to Sarah and everybody that worked so hard on that project. And these are what came out of it. And I think we have a bunch of our authors, I would say almost everybody in here is an author, except for a couple. The physical health benefits that came out of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, how you felt after you wrote that story. The improved immune system function. I don't know, but I would have to guess you probably didn't get a cold or a cough or whatever for maybe 30 to 40 days after you had that experience because your immune system was supported by your positive emotion. The lack of inflammation in your body leads to improved health. Positive mood changes. I know every time I write, I feel good about it. Even if it's a shitty first draft, I still feel good that I got it on paper. Reduction in stress and certainly decreased alcohol use. Now, I think people, there are certain authors that are known for their alcoholism from, 75 to 100 years ago. Edgar Allan Poe, I think, was a huge alcoholic, if I remember that correctly. So I, not sure exactly where this fits in, but I know for me, when I started writing my book, I stopped drinking, not because I wanted to, but because I did. And I didn't realize it until somewhere down the road. Now, never an alcoholic, but certainly imbibed my share. So writing a self-disclosure allows individuals to identify problems and work towards solutions through excessive language, providing an alternative for those who may not have access to therapy or are concerned about stigma. This is part of Dr. Pennebaker's work. He often talks about writing about the trauma, and Sarah so artfully shared Dr. Huberman's analysis of Dr. Pennebaker's work in that space. And it's a great study. The concerns I have with doing that kind of stuff is if you don't have the support system around you when you're writing about crap that has happened to you that bothers you, it's challenging because it can send you into a dark place without the support of recovery. So when I do my writing exercises, we're going to talk about me at my best, and not me, but you. So that is the difference between what we're doing here and the way Dr. Pennebaker works his magic with his interventions. Besides, he's a lot smarter than I, and you can't compare to that guy. So visual art and well-being. I don't think we'll discuss these when we go into the art space. We'll come back and revisit these, but understand that there's a lot of catharsis in the storytelling through art as well. And we're just going to go through these slides, and we're going to go back one. And this is the first activity. Do we want to start this tonight, or do we want to close it off here and start with this next time? What is everybody thinking? Do we want to have a brief discussion about what we've talked about so far and then start with the activities next week?
I think that might be a good idea because we have East Coasters.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. How does that sound to everybody? I don't want to make a decision for everybody, but
I think that would be good. And if this ends up going out 4 weeks, then
that was my next thought.
Then I think so be it. I mean,
yeah.
This is David, this is just awesome. I've just absolutely loved every minute of it. And I don't want to I don't want to kind of try and jam all of this, into a set timeline. And so I would rather, if we have to set it out to an
I tend to agree with you.
Extra week, yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
I
Well,
tend to agree.
why don't we do that? Why don't we shut it off now and then shut off the recording, talk about it, and then we'll just lengthen the weeks that you come back. Okay. However that works out well. This is great, David. I want to thank you
awesome.
so much.
So the building our toolkit will start next week. And then I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of flip back and forth between the slides, meaning we'll just reintroduce the idea of the literature piece and then go right into the activity next week.
Okay.
And then hopefully we can get both activities, the first two activities, done in one session, which would be the meaning statement and the meaning story. A lot of that will be working alone together. And so it'll be a lot less of me talking and a lot less of you doing. And then we can share after each of the two activities for those that are willing and interested in doing that. I will say that the meaning story is in theory a 500-word essay, which could be a lot for some people to do in a shorter period of time, but we don't have to do that. We can do a paragraph or two, and the effect is the same. You can go back and write the longer one if you choose to on your own.
Well, excellent. David, thank you again.
Absolutely.